Hey all, as we know that there are a lot of theories of development. So today in this video we are going to discuss about the psychodynamic theories. These theories are topographical model of mind, instinct drive theory, structural theory of mind, psychosexual theory of development. Also psychosocial theory, individual psychology and analytical psychology. These are the theories of personality to have a marked impact on psychology and psychiatry, right? So let us discuss about all these theories one by one. So the first one is the topographical model of mind, which was given by Sir Sigmund Freud in the year 1905, right? So he basically divided the mind into three regions, right? Three regions of mind. So the first one is the conscious level, second one is the pre-conscious level, and the third one is the unconscious level of mind. So at the conscious level of our mind, we are aware of certain things or thoughts or our environment, basically you can say, right? But at the pre-conscious level, we are having certain memories which can be recalled easily, but we are not aware of that. We need to focus. So there are certain memories which can be brought into our conscious only when we pay attention or we focus on that, right? Such as our parents' name or something like that. So there are recallable memories, you can say, right? Now the unconscious level of our mind. So there are certain memories which can't be easily recallable. So you can say these are the unrecallable memories, right? So these memories are not that much easy to be brought up into our conscious level. So it needs some help like therapist guidance, etc., to brought into our conscious level of our mind. So these are the unrecallable memories. So there were three regions of mind which was given by Sir Sigmund Freud in his topographical model of mind. So the second one is the instinct drive theory, which was also given by Sir Sigmund Freud, right? So it works on the instinct or the drive. This is basically the natural force, right, that causes a person to behave in a particular way, right? That is our instinct or the drive, right? It is having four components, that is the source, the impetus, the aim, and the object, right? So the source is a part of the body, you can say, from which the instinct arises. The impotence or the impetus is the amount of, this is the amount of force that is associated with the instinct or that is required for that instinct to happen, right? The third one is the aim. So it is any action. This is basically the action that is required to, towards that satisfaction, right? Now the object is basically the target. This is the target for the action. So these are all the four components of the instinct drive theory which is required to satisfy the instinct or the natural force, you can say. Now the structural theory of mind, which was given by Sir Sigmund Freud. Sir Sigmund Freud compared human mind with an iceberg. So the part of the iceberg which was above the surface of the water was considered as the conscious level of our mind. But the broad base which was below the level of water was considered as the unconscious level of our mind. And the preconscious level was nearer to the level of water, as we know that the memories which are present in our preconscious level of our mind can be easily recallable and brought into our consciousness, right, at the conscious level of our mind. But at the unconscious level of our mind, which is deep inside our, as such as in this iceberg which is very deep, can't be brought into our conscious level are the inaccessible memories, right? Are certain desires, or you can say the impulses present, which are very deep in our thoughts as well as in this iceberg. So this was all given by the Sir Sigmund Freud, right, in his structural theory of mind. Now the role of id, ego and superego, which is also considered as a part of structural theory of our mind basically. So here Freud suggested that our behavior is influenced by id, that is the biological drives, right? The superego, which are the social rules, and the mediating thought processes, which is our ego, mediating thoughts, right? So it is the primitive part, which is considered as a storehouse for biological based urges, that is the biological drives basically, right? So it is defined as inherited reservoir of unorganized drives. It is source of all pleasure. So it works on the pleasure principle, right? Pleasure principle. It would satisfy its fundamental urges immediately as they arouse without any rules or morals. So these instincts are basically immoral, right? Illogical and lacks unity of purpose. So this was all about id, which works on the pleasure principle, and basically it is all our biological drives, right? Now the id, that is the biological drives, are basically managed by ego only, right? So ego basically channelizes our behavior into more socially acceptable outlets. Ego is the one thing that distinguishes the things in the mind and the things in the external world. It is totally logical, right? It is all about learning and logical reasoning. So ego works on the reality principle. Reality principle. If it were left entirely to its own devices, organism would probably be destroyed. So that ego is very important in managing our id basically, right? Now the superego, which are the social rules, right? That is the internal part of individual that makes judgments, right? The child is not born with superego, but it is born with id, right? That is the biological drives, but superego is not inherited. So this element of personality structure is developed through training and the influence of our environment, right? So superego works on morality principle. So in this iceberg phenomenon, here we can see that it is basically resides in our unconscious level of our mind, which is totally hidden. But the ego and superego includes all the three levels of our mind, that is conscious, preconscious and the unconscious level, right? So this was all about the structural theory of mind. The psychosexual theory of development, which was given by Sigmund Freud. So his main focus was all the sex drives in this theory, right? He gave 5 stages of development in child and adolescent, which was considered as the psychosexual stages, right? So theory's main emphasis were on biological development in general and sexual development in particular. So main focus was on sexual development. So there was an innate tendency to seek pleasure via erogenous zones, he considered. So erogenous zones were the zones which were sensitive to touch, right? The parts of our body which are sensitive to touch are considered as the erogenous zones. If the child's need at any stage is unsatisfied or oversatisfied, it leads to fixation of the child at that particular stage. So this is all about the psychosexual theory of development in general. Now we will study about each stage in detail, right? So the first stage is the oral stage, which begins at birth and lasts till 18 months, right? At this stage, the child seeks pleasure from eating and sucking, right? So the mouth becomes the focus of pleasure in oral stage, right? So in oral stage, the infant obtains sensual pleasure by sucking, right? So this is the biological drive. So basically, the child's personality at this stage is controlled by id, right? Now the second stage is the anal stage, which starts from 18 months and lasts till 3 years of age. At this stage, the child seeks pleasure from bowel movements, right? So the first part of anal stage involves pleasure from expulsion of feces, and the later part involves pleasure from retention, right? So the child will often defecate to achieve this pleasure. This, however, would bring him into conflict with his parent, right? This conflict leads to the development of ego in this stage, which will control the id, that is the biological drive of expulsion and retention of feces, basically. So ego is developed in anal stage. So ego is developed, right? Now the third stage, that is the phallic stage, right, which begins in 3 years of age and lasts till 7 years of age. So at this stage, the child seeks pleasure from touching the genitals. Also, the child develops a sensual relationship with the opposite sex parent, right? The girls start liking their father and the boys will like their mother, right? So there are two complexes to define this sensual relationship, right, between the child and the opposite sex parent, that is the Oedipus complex and the Electra complex. So the Oedipus complex is between the boy child and the mother, right, whereas the Electra complex is between the girl child and the father. Now the fourth stage, that is the latent stage, right, which begins at 7 years of age and lasts till 11 years of age. It is relatively dormant stage, or you can say the inactive stage, right? So Freud believes that sexual impulses are suppressed. Sexual impulses are suppressed, right, at this time interval, you can say. Now the last stage, that is the genital stage, which begins at 11 years of age and lasts till 18 years of age. That is, it is the longest of all the 5 stages, right? At this stage, the child makes contact and forms relationship with the members of opposite sex, right? So there is basically a heterosexual attraction at this stage, right? So this was all about the stages of psychosexual theory. As we know that if the child's need at any stage is not satisfied or over satisfied, right, at certain stage, it will lead to fixation, basically unsatisfied or over satisfied, right? It will lead to fixation of that stage. So the first stage, that is the oral stage. So fixation at this stage will display many activities which will be centered around the mouth, right? The child will become talkative, garrulous, etc. Now the anal stage, right? If the child is fixated at the anal stage, that is at anal retentive stage, the child will be neat and clean. But at anal repulsive stage, the child will become moody and sarcastic, or you can say the messy, right? Now the phallic stage. If the child becomes fixated at phallic stage, the child will become overly preoccupied with self, like self obsessed, you can say. But at latency stage, if the child gets fixated, it demonstrates sexual sublimation and repression. Fixation at genital stage, which will lead to traditional sex roles and heterosexual orientation. Now we will discuss about the psychosocial theory, which was given by a Jewish German developmental psychologist Erik Homburger Erikson, right? He coined the term identity crisis, right? For Erikson, the most important force deriving human behavior and development of personality was the social interaction, right? So he proposed a developmental theory which covered all the 8 stages of man. Basically, it covered entire lifespan of a person. So these stages were trust versus mistrust, autonomy versus doubt, initiative versus guilt, industry versus inferiority, self-identity versus role confusion, intimacy versus isolation, generativity versus stagnation, and integrity versus despair. So let us discuss one by one. Now the first stage is trust versus mistrust, which is from 0 to 1 year of age. At this age, the child or the infant is basically dependent upon his or her mother, right? For the basic needs to be fulfilled. So the infant basically blindly trusts the caregiver, that is the mother. So the associated virtue is hope. If the child is pampered properly, cuddled, right, then the positive outcome will be a sense of trust will be built. But the negative outcome, if the child is neglected at this stage, the child will develop fear, suspicion at later stages in life, right? Now the second stage is autonomy versus shame or doubt, which is from 1 to 2 years of age. At this age, the toddlers learn to explore and do things for themselves, right? So their self-control and self-confidence will begin to develop at this stage. The associated virtue is will. The positive outcome, if the child is encouraged to explore, a sense of autonomy or a sense of confidence will be developed in the child. But if the parents are overprotective, then the child will be ashamed of his behavior and will doubt his abilities, right? Now the third stage is initiative versus guilt, which is from 2 to 6 years of age, right? So the children begin to interact with the environment at this stage. Motor and language skills begin to develop. The child tries to explore the environment, or you can say the things, right? So a beautiful word, that is why, is used by the child most of the times. So the associated virtue is purpose. If the parents are encouraging, right, and at the same time are consistent in disciplining the child will accept the concept of right and wrong. But the negative outcome will be a sense of guilt will be developed. The child will not be able to work independently. He or she will believe that it is wrong to be independent, right? Now the fourth stage, that is industry versus inferiority, which is from 6 to 12 years of age. At this age, the school is the most important place, right? So at this stage, peers becomes the key social agent. So at this stage, the child learn to master basic social and academic skills, right? So the associated virtue is competence. If the child can find pleasure in learning, right, then a sense of industry and competence will be developed. But if the child is unable to do so, then inferiority will be developed, that is inability to take up responsibility, right? Now the fifth stage is self-identity versus role confusion. So this stage is basically a crossroad between childhood and maturity, when the person start asking himself or herself that who am I, right? So the social agent is basically the person's society of peers in this stage. The associated virtue is basically fidelity, that is the faith or the belief, right? So the positive outcome will be the strong identity. The child will be able to take his or her decisions or will be ready to plan the future. But the negative outcome will be that he or she will be unable to make decisions, right? About his or her role in life, basically. Right? Now the next stage is the intimacy versus isolation. So an individual who is around 20 years of age, right, is more concerned about the intimacy which results in marriage, obviously, right, or a long lasting sexual union. So the associated virtue is basically love. Now the next stage, that is generativity versus stagnation. In this stage, individuals become concerned with being generative to improve themselves and the society in which they live, right? So the associated virtue is care in this stage, right? Finally, the last stage, that is the ego integrity or versus despair, right? If one is successfully resolves all the crises or conflicts in life, right, that individual looks back and develops a sense of ego, right? But if the resolutions were unsuccessful in one or more stages of development, then a sense or feeling of despair will be developed, that is incompetence will be developed in that person. So the associated virtue is wisdom in this stage, right? Now the analytic psychology was given by Carl Gustav Jung. He formed a psychoanalytic school known as analytic psychology. His theory was relative to Freud's concept, but he expanded Freud's concept of the unconscious as consisting of all humankind common, right? So he proposed around 12 archetypes, such as for mother, father, child, and hero. Such as mother will be selfless, caregiver, right? Father would be protective, etc. Now the individual psychology theory, which was given by Alfred Adler. According to him, Freud has overemphasized the sexual theory of neurosis, and the aggression was far more important, right, in the manifestation as striving for power, basically, right? So he introduced the term masculine protest, right, to describe the tendency to move from feminine to masculine active role. A role in power, basically, you can say. So this was all about the theories, the psychodynamic theories. Thank you.